1. I have lived in 5 states in the last 18 years and own property in 4. Usually I live in pretty rural areas. January of last year I closed on a house in a small village, 10 or 11 hours from where we then lived. The house was a foreclosure and rough. We visited about 4 times between April and October to do some work. The house is on a short dead-end road with 4 houses. The first 3 lots are roughly a quarter acre, including ours. During our visits, the neighbor to our left was extremely friendly and helpful. He also let it known he tried to lowball on our property before we bought it, and told us he tried to deter potential buyers not to buy it, but he missed us. One of my summer trips, I briefly met the neighbor on the other side of our house. He was a 21-year-old with his pregnant wife. He was nice enough, but not exactly someone I'd be friends with. The 21-year-old parked on the grass within 6 feet of our house. Unfortunately, I didn't know the property line, and there are no pins. He drove a state K9 vehicle for his job, and at the very least I thought it would make the house look not vacant and deter anyone from going into the house. The opposite neighbor continued to be friendly. I did see fairly fresh tire marks around the house in all sides of the yard. Fast forward to this spring, we finally moved in permanently. We texted the friendly neighbor letting him know we'd be there in the week, and asked if everything seemed okay. He said it's fine. He just had to move his truck he parked in our driveway, which he never asked to do. But he did seem to mow occasionally in the yard, and it helped it look occupied, so we didn't mind. When we arrived at 7:30 a.m., after a roughly 12-hour overnight drive and a hectic week wrapping up selling our other house, we briefly saw the wife of the friendly neighbor heading to work, and exchanged a few friendly words. We also saw 2 pontoon boats and a vehicle 6 feet from our house on the 21-year-old's side. Strangely, the friendly neighbors never said anything to us in the next week, despite greeting us quickly every other time they were there prior. We assumed they were just busy since they are constantly coming and going with their 7 kids. We had our plates full, and we were stressed from an interstate move, selling a house and moving into a major fixer-upper, and kept to ourselves. One of the first days we were there, we mentioned to the 21-year-old we were getting a fence after a survey. He said he was easygoing and we could put up a fence anywhere on that side. Roughly 25 inches of grass separates our buildings, but no property markers. He never moved his boats that were within 6 feet of our house. I will also note the other side already had a privacy fence from the friendly neighbors. During our first weeks, our only interaction with the friendly neighbors was scrambling to get their kids that are chasing their dogs, to get 4 of their loose dogs that went around the privacy fence out our yard to keep them away from our small 12-pound dog, and other reactive dog that was tied up. My other half was in the yard too at the time. We quickly got a temporary fence for a small portion of our backyard to help with this, but the dogs visited us uninvited several times, with little ability to control them on their part. After a few weeks we got a shed delivered. We wanted it to block the 21-year-old's canine dogs, he works with State Corrections Department, that are kenneled in his yard and barked every time we went outside. We called Thursday to order a shed, and we were told it would arrive Saturday morning. We since looked at our deed and tax maps and found our property dimensions and aerial mapping from the county. There was an established fence line that lines up with an existing pin, and the county map confirms. Our lot is 80 feet wide. We measured, and the 21-year-old's boats were completely on our property. We're a good 12 feet on our side by the map and county records where we staked out our shed. The guy doesn't often get home till late, so we knocked on his door, telling him we need the boats moved so our shed can be put on our land. He wasn't home, so my other half left a note explaining the situation and call if you have questions. Apparently his wife came home first and let him know, and my other half got a call that was belligerent, saying he will only talk to me, not a woman, and hung up. So when he finally got home at 11 p.m., I went outside and explained the situation and our shed delivery. I was also prepared with all county records, plat map, deed, tax map, etc. He said he wasn't arguing the lines, he had the maps and thought they were off, and wanted to see that our shed wasn't on his side of the property. Then it really began, not verbatim, but his words. "I don't mind the shed, but my problem is your wife does all the talking, and you haven't said 2 words to me. The other neighbor hasn't heard from you other than yelling at his dogs, and around here people just let their dogs be free. Every dog in the neighborhood in reality besides these are fenced in, or on reins in reality." I explained the dog situation. His reply, "So what? You have a fence." "The fence is in the middle of my lot, not on the perimeter." I explained I didn't bother the other neighbors because I figured they were busy and would talk to us when they weren't busy. "You figured wrong. You ruffled a lot of feathers around here." All this was very loud and sprinkled liberally with F-bombs, more than anything else at 11 p.m. "I don't know where you're from, but we don't act like that around here. We were ready to take you in as one of us," with lots of profanities used as filler. "Don't leave an effing note, call me. I don't have your number and you're often not home when I'm awake. You have it now. You should get it from the other neighbor." I'm pretty good at remaining calm, and he was very twitchy and angry. He didn't know how to handle the calm and finally said he'll move and walked away, swearing. "And I hope I never have to talk to you again." I ordered the survey the next day. Unfortunately, it takes about 6 to 8 weeks here to get one to work, so hopefully late July. Interestingly, he and the other neighbor were out all weekend, looking with a metal detector for pins which couldn't be found. Since then, he is still crossing the 80 feet measured line with his vehicle, but the boats haven't been back. He stayed closer to his side. The other neighbor put up more fence to contain his dogs. In recent days, the 21-year-old dumped a bunch of firewood that is at least 5 feet over the line, causing him to drive way over the line to park. I'm currently slowly resiting my house and propped my ladder and put my scraps in the way to prevent that, which worked so far. I don't want to get ahead of myself till the survey is done, but the neighbors won't even look at us, which is fine by us, as we are extremely introverted and keep to ourselves anyway. The fence, which has no setbacks here, is going up the day the survey is complete. I'm sure there will be fallback, but it wasn't handled civilly by him, so I'm covering myself legally. I will add that I'm 25 years older than this 21-year-old, first-time property owner, and actually owned our lot 2 weeks before he did. Hellfreezer's note. The nasty part of me, and do not do this, but the nasty part of me wants you to make sure you're firmly on your property line, then put nails and broken glass down. And that way, if he decides to park in your property, oops, his fault, he shouldn't be there. But of course, that's probably not legal. Yada yada yada. The sad fact is, what you have here is a little boy who thinks he's a man. He hasn't yet figured out how to be a man at 21 years old. He thinks because he works with big dogs and he works for the state that he's really got something there. Well, it's important to know that most marriages end in divorce these days, so odds are he and the wife will break up, especially at that very young age of theirs, and they'll be out of your hair before you know it. Or he might grow up. Either way works out for you. Good luck. 2. Context. My husband and I are renting a duplex in a small-town setting. Main Street, alleys, old buildings from the 1700s type of area. There is a church next to our house, and their parking lot is sandwiched between the church and my duplex. We are allowed to use the church parking lot as long as we move our cars for Sunday services. My husband and I do this every week. We have a small, sad yard, which is just a patch of grass that runs along the parking lot. We got a small wire garden fence to make it look more yardy, since people were bringing their dogs over to poo and leaving it there. The fence has helped with that. Okay, now on to the rant. I hate them. About 4 months ago, the Trash family moved in. Mom, Dad, 2 dogs, and an uncertain amount of children. Anywhere between 3 and 6 children at any given time. I haven't slept since March. They weren't allowed to have 2 dogs when they moved in, so they did it anyway and ended up having to rehome one of their dogs. If it wasn't for their neglectful ways, maybe they would have gotten away with it. They let their dogs out unattended and leave the gate to their fence open all the time. The dogs get out and run amok through the town while the owners sit at home with their thumbs up their butts. They don't answer the door. They keep 3 broken down, beat-up cars that are out of inspection in the church parking lot, right in front of my door. These cars have a collection of notices on them from the church telling them to move the cars. One has a flat tire, and the other is a dented-up truck with a washing machine in the bed. They have had police called on them for allowing their young kids to roam the alleyways and parking lot on the main street unsupervised. I have never seen one of the parents watching them. They still don't care. Their kids were taking baseball bats to the shrubs in the parking lot today. I even caught one of the kids throwing trash in my yard recently. They have destroyed a portion of my fence by throwing plywood and pallets into my yard. They just threw wood on top of my fence and left it there. It was all mangled and I had to throw it away. The greasy hick of a dad was out front of the main building running a leaf blower 1:30 a.m. on a Monday. There's no grass, there are no leaves, there was no debris. The noise is the worst, the violent shaking of the house as a result of relentless banging on the floors and walls by these kids. This happens constantly, and goes well into 3 or 4 a.m. all nights of the week. These loud, jarring booms send my bedroom windows clattering with the force that these little darlings are going at it. I am jolted awake with all this adrenaline multiple times a night. I moved my bedroom to another part of the house today to get away from them, but they are a force. I rearranged the entirety of my house to create distance. Right now it's 1:40 a.m. and my walls are shaking. Those children are doing construction work in the next room. They are screaming. Now it's 2:15 a.m. I just now saw both parents arrive home together, so the kids have been all alone all night. All of these kids look to be at elementary school age. I don't know what to do at this point. The guy is a jobless drunk who is up all night and sleeps all day, so the chances of catching him outside organically to try and talk to him are slim. I have their landlord's number and have been considering sending them a message, but what does one even say? This is so not my character to do something like that. My desperation is taking over. I don't want to ring their doorbell and confront them. That seems kind of crazy, right? Plus, I witnessed the parents arguing a few times, and I don't feel good about the vibes over there. The inconsideration is unbelievable. The kids are brats, and the parents are greasy, slack-jawed, dead-eyed morons. Screw you and your damn family. Hellfreezer's note. Definitely don't confront them. I don't think you're going to get a good reaction there. You might just cause more problems. They don't sound like reasonable people, so don't waste your time. What you might ultimately have to do is call your landlord, assuming the landlord's smart enough to be discreet about it. And if they're making noise that late at night, check what the noise ordinance is in your area to see when noise can be made until. And if they're making noise consistently after that time, call the police. If those kids are alone, well, the police can take care of that. It's really not on you what happens after that point. Might actually be better for the kids all round. But whatever it is, you pay to enjoy your home, and you're being prevented from doing that. I really do hope it works out for you. 3. Back in 2005, I was finally living on my own. Well, mostly on my own. I moved to where I'm currently living as a caretaker for my mentally challenged uncle, because at the time my grandmother was still working as a home healthcare nurse. He's mentally between 5 and 8 years old. For the most part, it's pretty easy. I had a day job working at one of the local mom-and-pop stores. My uncle was able to find work as a dishwasher at one of the little out-of-the-way restaurants in our town. For context, we live on the eastern shore of Virginia, in a part of Virginia that's so often overlooked that most tourists believe we're actually part of Maryland. Nope. Traveling along Route 13, and once you get on the other side of the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel, you're still in Virginia. It doesn't just start at Virginia Beach. It's a quiet place, mostly farming communities and watermen, not much crime, little town drama. And most people look out for one another. The thing is, you really have to travel to get from point A to point B because most things are out of the way. Want to see a movie? There's a movie theater in town. But unless you want to watch something PG, you have to travel to Salisbury, Maryland, and that's a 3-hour drive both ways. Want to go shopping somewhere that isn't Walmart, Food Lion, Dollar General, or one of many thrift stores? Same deal. But again, people are what make it worth living here. I personally have lived here on and off for the better part of 25 years. So my uncle and I found an apartment in town and much closer to our jobs. It was great. A little downstairs apartment attached to a duplex, and it was just big enough for 3 people to live comfortably. Our original neighbor was an older gentleman, a retired waterman, who I will call Walt for the sake of the story. Without question, Walt was lonely. His wife passed away in 1998, and he never remarried. His only child was in one of the armed forces, Air Force I believe, and he's currently enlisted. So 9 times out of 10, if my uncle and I were home from work, and Walt knew, he would usually come up with an excuse to make conversation. I honestly don't mind. Never once did he give me a reason to dislike his company. As a matter of fact, he surprised me more than once. My extremely open gay cousin came to visit and check out the town for the first time. He and the guy he was dating at the time show up and were excitedly saying hello to one another. Walt comes downstairs. Keep in mind the one thing about this community, as it is highly conservative. It's gotten more progressive throughout the years, but at the time the LGBTQ+ community usually got glares, stares, and nasty comments. I see Walt standing there quietly, and in the back of my mind I'm thinking, please don't let this be the moment the mask slips. Walt clears his throat to get our attention, and let me turn around. He's got his hand in his pocket. The look on his face, well, I can only say it was unreadable. I half expected him to regurgitate a lot of the rhetoric I've been hearing among the religious folks. Instead, he pulls a pack of playing cards from his pocket, looks at the 3 of us before asking, "You boys play rummy?" We all laughed, and the tension just melted away. The 3 of us went up to Walt's apartment and sat there for several hours telling stories, playing cards, and enjoying pizza and iced tea. This is a great core memory. And so when Walt's son was able to come visit one day, only to find his father had a stroke at some point in time during the night, we were heartbroken to find out he was going to have to spend the rest of his days in a nursing home. For several months, the upstairs apartment stayed vacant, and then one day, in the early fall, a new neighbor moved in. And this is when things started to become hellish. Screw brevity, screw anonymity. The guy's name was Terry. He was one of those individuals who adopted the term redneck as a fashion statement. He literally had a tattoo on the side of his neck. Close your eyes and think about what you see when you hear the term trailer trash. Whatever you picture, you're pretty close. He was about 5'10", spindly, dark brown mullet hair, and a handlebar mustache that would have made 1980s James Hetfield jealous. He had a Pabst Blue Ribbon t-shirt with the sleeves cut off, covering his slight beer gut. He was wearing a pair of torn-up jeans and well-worn boots. My first impression was hard-working country guy. But our first interaction would blow that first impression right out of the water. My uncle and I tried to greet him and ask if he needed help moving anything up. You know, the neighborly thing to do. He burps. Scratch that. Homer Simpson belches in my direction and proceeds to blow it in my face. Like actually pucker his lips and blow that putrid gas cloud in my face. He then points at a truck, and I see a Hispanic family I know pretty well, as they are customers of mine.
And I bet you want something for helping me. Pfft, I hired these Mexicans because they'll work half of what I pay you, or even less.
I was taken aback by his blatantly messed up statement, but not as much as the older son who was working with his brother and father at the time. He started to be less careful with the boxes and shot Terry a look that should have immolated him every single time he walked past. Terry stood there on his porch pounding can after can of PBR, getting steadily and progressively drunk. By the time the 3 movers were done getting everything upstairs, he'd already polished off an entire 6-pack and was steadily talking crap the entire time. My bedroom faced the front of the house. I had my window open because at the time I had pet rats, and I had just finished cleaning out their enclosure. Figured I'd air out the room a little as I'm walking past my window, seeing everybody load up into this mid-sized moving truck. I see the passenger side window roll down. The oldest son looks in Terry's direction and says, "We're glad you paid us, but we're bilingual. All 3 of us understood every single word you were saying, you racist dick." And with that they drove off, Terry on the front porch and a little swinging bench the landlord hung up there long before we moved in. He would fall asleep in a drunken stupor while cursing the movers' names, which, uncoincidentally, he didn't even know. And that was just the start. For months we dealt with evenings that would turn into early mornings full of what I can only describe as the sounds of a drunken clan meeting accompanied by an off-Broadway production of Stomp. He would yell racial slurs out of his window at people just out for an evening walk. You know, the real redneck kind of stuff. And something tells me he probably flunked American History 101 because that isn't what a real redneck is. Now, say what you will about me. I may not be perfect, but one thing I am is incredibly patient. It takes a lot for me to call the police or file a noise complaint. At the time, I was a guy in his early 20s, and I, too, could lose track of time. I was guilty of having loud conversations well into the early hours, but the thing is, it was usually while I was playing cards or checkers with my friends and chatting about our work week. Never once did we get as ugly as Terry did every single weekend, like clockwork. But my patience had worn so thin it was see-through. I finally broke, and I called our little 3-man police department. I gave them a detailed description of what we have been dealing with for the past 18 months, and I politely asked them to see if they could talk some sense into this joker. I don't think it was 5 minutes before they were knocking on his door. He answers, clearly drunk, and proceeds to berate these 2 officers. The bigger of the 2 puts a bit of bass in his voice, and suddenly Terry goes whisper quiet. He says okay and proceeds to go back upstairs. The 2 officers then make their way around back to the entrance of my apartment, and they explain what happened. They told me he was 1 octave away from being cuffed and that yes, he was absolutely trashed. But seeing how things didn't escalate any further and there were no laws against being drunk on a Saturday, they really couldn't take him in. But now, I was just grateful they got him to be quiet. I thank them for coming out and I go to bed. I didn't have a car at the time, so I needed a bike to and from work every day. That next morning was a slog. It was the longest 4.5-mile bike ride of my young adult life. Of course, my co-workers were well aware of the situation, and when I came through that door looking like 5 pounds of crap stuffed into a 1-pound bag, they knew. My boss at the time was a kind and fair man, and about halfway through my shift I can barely keep my eyes open. Sent me home to get some sleep, but paid me for the full shift. Thankfully, I was off the next day, so I could actually get some rest. But that isn't how things went down. I got home, I slept until about 8 p.m. Yeah, my sleep cycle was screwed up, but I figured I could stay up until around 2, then go back to sleep from that point. Somewhere around 9 p.m., I'm sitting in my room and working on my MySpace profile while listening to some music. I start hearing what sounds like somebody both flinging an entire shelf worth of canned goods onto a wood floor, followed by glass smashing outside my window. I grab the baseball bat I keep next to my closet and quietly make my way over to the window. Fully expecting the worst to go down, I look out and who do I see? Terry is throwing empty beer bottles out his window and into the streets and on the sidewalk. The whole time he's cursing my name. Forgot to charge my cell phone earlier that day, and it was at 0%. So I stuck it on the charger and told myself that if he kept at it, I'd be calling the cops again. It's getting close to 11 p.m. and suddenly I get a knock at my door. It's the 2 cops from the other night, and they're telling me they have a noise complaint against me. I stop and think about it for a moment and realized I turned my music up to drown out Terry's theatrics and completely lost track of time. I apologize and turn my music down. I explained to the 2 officers what exactly had been happening that night and why my music was turned up to begin with. The same cop that managed to quiet Terry down the other night cocked an eyebrow at me when he heard about the beer bottles. He put up his finger and told his partner to wait for a moment, and walked through the alleyway between my old place and my next-door neighbor's house. Sure thing, he found about a dozen beer bottles worth of broken glass all over the sidewalk and in the streets. For that, they were able to do something. Terry got cuffed and taken to the drunk tank that night. I don't know what he was charged with, if he was charged with anything at all. But when he eventually got back, he was quiet as a church mouse for a couple of weeks. During this 2-week period, we had a surprise visit from our landlord. He asked me if I'd called the police on Terry. I told him I did, told him why. told him that he had called the cops on me for a noise complaint because I lost track of my music. I also told him about how he had been throwing beer bottles out of his window, harassing the other neighbors, screaming racial crap out of his windows, and making the people on the block generally uncomfortable. I told him my now next-door neighbor was one of those guys who would fire up the grill on a Saturday while listening to Creedence Clearwater Revival, "Ooh, Stop the Rain," and would invite anyone over for a burger if he had enough to spare, had gone to an almost complete and total shut-in thanks to Terry. And I told my landlord to go talk to him if he needed proof. What my landlord said next completely floored me.
Look, I'm sorry he's putting everybody through the ringer. He did this at his last two places as well. I would appreciate if you called me first before calling the police again. Terry's my son. His mother and I are trying to teach him responsibility.
I fought the urge, I really did, but I fought and I lost. Ha! Responsibility? You're trying to teach him responsibility? I just got through telling you he's making everybody within an 8-house radius at the very least uncomfortable. I just got done telling you he's throwing beer bottles into the street on the sidewalk. What if he hit somebody? All he does is drink. All he does is act like some low-rent KKK member. And you're worried about teaching him responsibility? How about you kick him out of the apartment and make him rent from somebody who won't be his doormat? My landlord looked like he'd short-circuited. I really don't think anybody had ever put it to him like that before. One second he looked like he wanted to chew my head off, and then the next he was genuinely sorry, and he switched between that several times before finally speaking again.
We've tried. He's got a reputation. Not many people are willing to take a chance on him.
I'm really sorry he's putting you through this. I looked at my landlord, and this time he could tell I was starting to get upset. That sounds like a pretty poor apology to me. Seriously, do us all a favor. Walk around and talk to the other neighbors. You'll find exactly what kind of hell he's putting everybody through. If you're not willing to do that, fork over my security deposit. I'll find another place to go. And keep in mind, sir, I saved you a fair amount of money in repairs by doing them myself. Repairs I told you I was doing. Repairs you said you would take off my rent, and you never did. I have receipts for all those materials, so after you fork over my security deposit, fork over the money for the repairs too. I've been nothing but quiet. I've been a model tenant, you even said so yourself. But if you're not willing to do something about your own damn son making everybody else miserable, my uncle and I are gone. Consider us ghosts. I shut the door on my landlord and went back into my room. A couple of minutes later, I heard him get into his truck and leave. Yes, I lost my temper. I fully expected to be kicked out. Instead, he actually listens to what I said. He started at the end of the block and spoke to whatever neighbors he could. He finds out I'm not only telling the truth, but his son had been up to far more than any of us knew. He made a pass at one of the neighbors' teen daughters, and when the father spoke up and told him to get lost, he retaliated by slashing the tires on their car. They couldn't prove it was him, but it was a little too coincidental. My next-door neighbor stopped coming outside because one day, while I was at work, he was doing his typical grilling routine when he invited Terry over for some dogs and burgers. Terry hurled a homophobic slur his way and proceeded to throw a beer bottle at his head. He barely missed, but that was enough for my neighbor to take the grilling routine over to a friend's house on the weekends. My landlord realized if he wouldn't do anything, and it got out that his tenant was his child, he would have numerous lawsuits against him, so he begrudgingly kicked out his son that day for violating every single term of the lease. It was chaotic, and the county sheriff had to get involved, but he was finally gone. My landlord had a wake-up call that day. After his son was taken away by the police again, he would go up to the apartment and find his son had done thousands of dollars worth of damage in his drunken stupors. Holes punched in the wall, spilled beer and liquor all over the wood floor, huge dents inside of the floor from where he had apparently dropped something heavy out of the cupboards in the kitchen, racial slurs carved into plaster walls in a few of the rooms. And he even drunkenly urinated in the non-functional fireplace in the living room. But up until I had mentioned what I guess my landlord figured was leverage, He was just going to sweep this under the rug and let his son continue to do whatever he wanted to do. My uncle and I finished out the remainder of our lease and found a slightly larger side-story place for just about the same amount of money per month, right across town. Best part? We were in the section of town where we no longer had to deal with the outrageous water bill, and we had no upstairs to be worried about, therefore no upstairs neighbors and their nepotist parents. No place is perfect, some places are certainly better than others, and I wouldn't trade this place for the world, but Terry, I hope you either got help, or somebody put you in your place. In any case, I hope you aren't anybody else's problem. 4. I have lived in my flat for 7 years now with my boyfriend. We are in our late 20s. We rent the flat, which is in a quiet street. Our flat block historically has been very quiet and never had any problems. Typically, tenants move in and out quite quickly on our flat block, which is a block of 6 flats, ours being on the very top floor, and everyone keeps to themselves generally, which I like. We both work from home. I work in the bedroom, which looks out onto the garden, and he works in the living room, which looks out onto the street. Last year, new residents moved into our flat block. A couple, man and a woman, maybe in their 40s, on the ground floor. We have never met, but seen each other in passing. We have noticed they are very into their gardening. Our garden is a communal garden. I don't mind them using the garden, but the man is so annoying I cannot begin to explain. It's not just the loud gardening noises of scraping, hammering, drilling, etc. It's the loud music he is playing, his whistling, singing, and also his grumpy noises. Let me explain. Whenever he hurts himself or something doesn't go his way in the garden, he shouts and swears so loudly, along with the aggressive grunting noises. For context, I am not against swearing per se, as I swear, but I also have self-awareness and would never act like he is acting in a communal area in public. I noticed it happening last summer, but thought to give him the benefit of the doubt, but he is doing it again this summer, and I don't want this to be the norm. It's getting warm now in Scotland, and we don't have AC, and our building is very old, built to keep the warmth in. So it means windows open all the time, which also means I have to hear his nonsense. Even with the window closed, I can still hear it. I simply cannot think when I work due to the noise in the garden, and it's a shame, as it used to always be so peaceful. And because it's cold in the winter, he is never out in the garden, so it's only in the summertime since they've moved in I've noticed this odd behavior. I also feel that we cannot use the garden, as he has created such an unwelcoming vibe that I don't even want to go into the garden. Like I said before, tenants who move into our flat block come and go quite quickly, so we're no stranger to many different people using the garden for parties, barbecues, sunbathing, gardening, etc. But it hasn't quite been like this, as everyone is always very considerate. I was standing at the bus stop at the end of our street once, and was approached by a neighbor who lives in the block of flats next to us, who has lived there since the 80s, and pretty much knows everything and everyone who lives on this street. He asked me if I knew the couple on the ground floor in my block, and I said I hadn't met them, etc., and he told me this wild story. Basically, a girl that lived on the middle floor directly under my flat, who was now moved out, had to call the police on him due to him being a drunken idiot who was constantly slamming doors and swearing loudly in the hallways. The neighbor said he had apparently punched her door, maybe in confusion, thinking it was his door. But yeah, the police had come and gave him a warning or whatever. There was another instance where the police was called, I think by his own wife or girlfriend, about a disturbance involving smashing wine bottles. I think me and my partner must have been away visiting family during these instances, but aren't surprised due to his brutish demeanor. Anyways, I'm thinking about writing a short letter and posting it in their door, as I have well and truly had it with his nonsense if I'm honest. I won't be sharp, but kindly point out that they aren't the only ones who live here. My work revolves around a lot of writing, sometimes doing Zoom meetings with my manager and other colleagues, and I've had to apologize for the noise. It's the principles, really. If we exercise consideration to them, they should do the same. Plus, this isn't him acting like that in his own space that I'm complaining about. He is acting like this in a communal area near people's windows, therefore be considerate. Am I overreacting? They aren't doing this late at night, thank God. But this noise isn't just at the weekends, and I wish it was, as I don't work weekends. But it's just been happening on and off during the week when I'm working, and I don't know what to do anymore. I thought I'd ask first before doing anything, as this is the first time I've experienced this. For context, my flat is a one-bedroom flat with a living room, bathroom, and small kitchen, so there's nowhere for me to go during his daily garden shenanigans. We don't have children either, but I think if we did, I wouldn't want children to hear him calling everything "see you next Tuesday" so loudly. I often wonder if his wife or girlfriend is okay, and if he's that aggressive about gardening, then I shudder to think what he's like behind closed doors. Any advice about this is very much appreciated. Thank you for listening. Alfreezer's note. If he's that aggressive, I don't think it's a good idea to pin a note to his door. He's not going to be receptive to it. What I suggest you do is just start recording when he's doing this. There is such a thing as a reasonable noise, but if he's being as loud and aggressive as you say he is, I think that constitutes a public nuisance. Maybe you could get him on that, so I think a quiet little call to the police once you have enough recorded evidence. But the pinning the note to his door would only work if he knows it's definitely not coming from you. You'd have to make sure he's not home when you're doing it. I certainly don't want you to put yourself in any danger. He sounds like a very aggressive man indeed. And I suspect I know what was in those wine bottles. Anyway, best of luck, and I hope it all works out for you all. 5. I'm not sure what to think anymore, as we've been told we're the bad neighbors through all of these issues. We moved into our home in 2022, so we've been here a little over 2 years. Initially, all the neighbors around us were very friendly and welcoming. They would invite us for future barbecues, offer to watch our dogs, and even invite us on their boat. We have 2 small dogs, and one of our next-door neighbors also has a small dog. When we moved in, we got one of those electric fences that isn't in ground but emits a radius from a device inside. We found out that we had the same system as the next-door neighbors. So we talked to them, and we both agreed it would be fine to combine the fences, so all of our dogs had more room and could play with each other. This meant our dogs could go into his yard and his dog into ours. This worked very well for about a year. Last year, our next-door neighbor's son, early 20s, moved back in with him. I would notice our dogs barking at him when they were outside, but never saw any aggression, as they are not aggressive dogs. Next-door neighbor never mentioned anything about the barking or any other issues with our dogs. I was outside one day with our dogs when next-door neighbor's son came outside, and our dogs started barking at him. He yelled at me, "You need to keep your dogs out of your yard. This is the 3rd time I've been bitten and your dog ripped my pants." I was surprised, but immediately went inside and told my husband. We immediately changed the radius of our electric fence so our dogs could no longer get into their yard at all. I apologized to next-door neighbor's son and sent him money for his ripped pants. Again, they never mentioned any of this to us up until this point. If they had mentioned it earlier, we absolutely would have moved the fence sooner. After this incident, we ended up having a physical fence built in our backyard so our dogs could have room to run around. The new electric fence radius was maybe 5 feet, so they didn't have much room. The neighbors on our other side kind of took offense to us building the fence because they liked the open feel of our backyards together. They asked why we were building it, and we were honest and just said, "Our dogs and next-door neighbor's son don't seem to get along." Looking back, I now realize I should not have said this, but we weren't trying to be malicious or gossip by saying that. All of this happened about 6 months ago. Fast forward to now, we have had issues with next-door neighbor and his son driving through our yard. There is a 6-foot-wide patch of grass between our driveways. When they don't want to move one of their cars, they drive through the grass and out through our driveway. This has happened at least 10 times or so in the past 2 weeks. We also saw next-door neighbor's son moving dirt back along our fence and kicking it down our hill, which broke part of our fence. My husband was angry with these issues, so he texted next-door neighbor and confronted him. Next-door neighbor said,
"Can't you talk to me like a man?"
So later that evening, we went and knocked on his door. Next-door neighbor came out guns blazing and immediately got into my husband's face yelling at him. Husband said, "Can you step back? You're getting aggressive." Next door neighbor cursed at him and told us to get off his property. So, we went to our driveway. He followed us there, and husband kept saying, "Will you stop driving through our backyard?" And next door neighbor said,
I will drive through your yard whenever I want.
and then proceeded to tell husband he will knock his effing teeth out. We made a police report, but asked them not to come out, so we didn't make things worse. What would you do in this situation? Well, I would build a fence so that my front yard was completely separated from the neighbors on both sides. I would also have had the police come out and have a word with the neighbor. And I'd also probably have wanted proof that your dogs had actually done anything to the neighbor's son. I suspect it was lying. Based on what you've said, they sound like the type. As for the neighbors on the other side getting offended by you building a fence, screw them. They pay for their property, they don't pay for the view into your property. I'm far from being a lawyer, but I've actually heard people try to sue their neighbors for building a fence or putting up some sort of barrier on their property legally, and they've got laughed out of court for that reason alone. I strongly suggest you just keep to yourselves, completely ignore the neighbors, get those fences erected, make sure they're firmly on your property, and then forget that those terrible neighbors exist. It doesn't sound like you've done anything wrong here. I mean, literally not one thing have you done wrong. You've been very accommodating, more than most people would be expected to. As I always say in these situations, keep a note of anything that happens. I'd suggest setting up a camera. Make sure it's only facing onto your property. Obviously, you want to cover yourself legally there. Front and back garden, just as a security precaution, just in case they try any nonsense. But I certainly hope they leave you alone from now on. Good luck. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Naughty Neighbours, Episode 5. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Before you go, I would appreciate it if you hit the like button and share the video with friends and family. If you'd like to get these videos early, then you can get access to those via my Patreon page, where everyone gets them on the Monday, for as little as $1 or more a month. Every dollar really does help keep this channel going. You'll also find links in the description to the Hellfreezer Discord server, as well as a link to the Hellfreezer merchandise store on Teespring, where you can get your t-shirts, your hoodies, and even your mugs if you feel so inclined. And if you really enjoyed today's video, you can leave a one-off tip by clicking on the heart with the $sign underneath and selecting the tip of your choice. Of course, that and none of that is ever required, but I do very much appreciate it, and thank you kindly. Okay, no other bits and bobs today, so let's move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. Today's question is: toothbrush, do you like an electric or a manual? Personally speaking, I used a manual for years, and that was good enough, got the job done, until one day I bought myself an electric toothbrush, and it was like a whole new world, and my teeth had never felt so clean. The only problem I have is sometimes I forget to charge it, which reminds me it's probably about due for a charge, and that can be quite annoying if you go to pick it up to brush your teeth and it cuts out. Then it becomes a manual. Why don't you let me know what you prefer in a comment below, and before we go, let's have the answer of the day from a previous video. I think this was about any books you were looking forward to coming out this year. And today's answer comes from M. Lee. I'm looking forward to the book Kill the Beast by the lovely Serena Valentino. It's the 11th book in her Disney villain series that I'm so glad my brother hooked me onto. I need to reread The Beast Within, which is an earlier installment, to see if there's any overlap with that part of the ongoing story. Thank you very much for your answer, M. Lee. And with that, I'm going to head off for now, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.